I took on 3 bosses and 4 normal encounters in my Bloodborne tabletop RPG. And with the experience gained, I think it's time for an update. But before we begin, I want to thank both the Backlogs and Press Continue of Challenge Running fame for allowing me to use some of their gameplay footage as B-roll for this video, as I don't have the hardware to record actual Bloodborne gameplay myself. So yeah, thanks guys! And before we get to the changes to the system, I want to highlight one thing I really enjoy about the game, and that is how deadly every encounter can become. With low or low-ish hit points for every character, getting critically hit is always a very scary prospect. And yet, HP isn't so low that everyone drops dead after getting hit by any stray attack. So I think that system is working very well, and exactly as intended. For now at least. That might change when our characters end up with skill points to spare to put into Vitality, but even then, the absolute maximum amount of hit points a character can achieve in this game is 50, which is a lot, but not nearly as much as a high-level character in other combat-focused TTRPGs would end up with. And also highly implausible, as the average hit point maximum at max Vitality is only 27.5. Long story short, no changes to that system. For now at least. Where I do want to make changes, however, is the attack selection for our player characters. You see, while playtesting, I often found myself in a situation where my characters basically only have a single useful action to take, usually hitting someone with a basic weapon attack. And that unfortunately gets old rather quickly. For many players at least. So the goal here is to expand the variety of useful moves our players can take. Kind of a similar problem From Software solved with weapon arts when going from Dark Souls 3 to Elden Ring actually. Turns out buffing weapon arts actually makes them usable. And a similar process we will be applying here. Instead of reinventing dozens of new moves or mechanics, we will simply make existing moves stronger. And the existing mechanics I identified for that purpose are special strong attack moves, transform attacks, and items. Let's start with the first one, and I'm specifically thinking of the Hunter Axe's spinning slash attack. It is the highest power move in the game at 3d12 plus 2 times strength slashing damage. Not only against one, but all targets within 10 feet range. Only offset by a very high cooldown period after the attack. Oh, and it knocks down the opponent, or at least staggers them. On paper, extremely strong, yet I never found an opportunity to use the attack, and only managed to create an opportunity when planning at least one turn ahead. And the reason for that is twofold. For one, the wind-up or charge time of the attack was too high at 4 ticks on the timeline. But that's an issue I hotfixed already. The second, and much bigger problem, is friendly fire. You see, Bloodborne is a melee-focused game, and when enemies form a mob, the situation where the spinning slash is most useful, then your allies will most likely want to get close to that mob as well, and consequently end up within the range of your attack. And, as we have seen before, they are highly likely to get one-shot by the attack. Now they could use that dodge reaction to escape damage, which is very likely to succeed. Dodging Hunter's attacks has a pretty low DC, all things considered, but as you can only dodge or parry once per turn, that is certainly an investment you don't want to use on an allied attack. And after weighing all the pros and cons of using the spinning slash, in most cases, if not all cases, I came to the conclusion it wasn't worth using over a basic attack. And that is kind of disappointing. So, how do we remedy the issue? You can leave your guesses in the comments, and you will most likely be correct. Just eliminate friendly fire from allied weapon attacks. Not a difficult fix to come up with, but not one I'm particularly happy about. You probably know that summons in Bloodborne do not have friendly fire either, but that is a limitation we accept in video games, like how most RPG characters can't jump a fence. but it's usually not something we accept in a tabletop setting, where the only constraint is supposed to be our imagination. With that being said, it is still the best solution I managed to come up with. And in the end, fun should always be the number one priority in any game. Not realism, which of course comes in as a close second in Bloodborne. And being able to simply use a move when it suits you, without having to plan ahead 5 turns, sounds like a major increase in fun to me. And I know what some of you are thinking. But Fireball in D&D also deals damage to allies, and we can deal with that. Why are you making it so much easier here? Well, my friend, because this game is different. First of all, Fireball is a ranged spell. You can throw it at incoming enemies without endangering your allies. Second of all, most D&D parties don't exclusively consist of melee-focused characters, so the front lines will most likely be less crowded. Thirdly, if you choose to be an evocation wizard, you can protect your friends from the blast, even if you end up hitting them. And lastly, a fireball is extremely unlikely to actually one-shot a D&D character, especially a frontliner, unless it is cast at a level 1 or 2 character. So as you can see, quite different situations. A fireball is not nearly as dangerous as being axed, in the Bloodborne tabletop RPG at least. Moving on to the second item on my list, transform attacks. Right now, they grant some bonus damage and instantly transform the weapon on use, and slightly increase the cooldown of the attack, and they can only be used if your last action taken was an attack. Transform attacks have been useful occasionally, but not as much as I would want. Mainly because I allow my characters to already start with their weapon in transformed or untransformed state, at will. So the transform attack usually boils down to the question, do you want plus 1d4 damage on an attack at the cost of a higher cooldown and your weapon being in the worse transformation state? It usually isn't worth it. So from now on, transform attacks won't grant bonus damage anymore, but instead be faster than regular attacks. They still instantly transform the weapon and allow you to immediately strike with your transformed weapon, but instead of the 1d4 bonus damage, the attack's cooldown is reduced by 2 ticks. So for example, when using a transform attack to go from the one-handed Hunter Axe to the two-handed variation, the transform attack will have the extended range of the two-handed axe and also deal 1d12 plus strength damage, instead of the 1d10 plus strength of the one-handed axe. And the usual cooldown of 10 ticks of the two-handed axe is reduced to 8. The requirement that the last action taken before a transform attack must have been an attack, not including transform attacks of course, does stay in place though. Overall, a pretty big buff I think, and one that will hopefully result in more opportunities to use this move. And finally, items. And that mainly means Molotov cocktails. Right now they deal 1d6 plus arcane damage, and that means for all our characters in the playtesting sessions, except for German, between 0 and 4 fire damage. Unless they get a critical hit of course. In other words, the damage is very bad, so no one uses them. Simple fix here. Massive damage increase. We are going from 1d6 plus arcane to 3d6 plus arcane, but never less than 3d6 plus 0. With that, using Molotovs will become a viable move for any character. So viable in fact that I might regret this change later, and they might get nerfed again in the future. So stay tuned for that update. And with that, my characters will hopefully have a significantly extended arsenal to face the horrors of the hunt. And we can move on to a different set of changes. I noticed bosses are already getting kinda weak. My characters are in much more danger when fighting multiple non-boss enemies. And that of course is a very common problem in turn-based, but really all games. 1v4 just isn't really fair. Luckily, the inherent issue of one boss having much fewer actions than 4 players is largely offset by the game's tick system, but that apparently just isn't quite enough yet. I could of course just put some mobs in each boss's arena, but Bloodborne is full of very difficult single enemy boss fights, and so I want my tabletop RPG to be able to recreate that. Measure 1. Increase the hit points of later bosses. Usually I don't like HP bloat, but I think the increase in damage our characters can deal will rapidly outpace the defense of their enemies otherwise. The method we will be using is also inspired by a Bloodborne mechanic. We will be using the moon to track game progression. You probably know that in Bloodborne, once you touch Lawrence's skull, time progresses and the game turns from evening to night. And once you beat Rom, the vacuous spider, the full moon turns blood red. In Bloodborne, that has multiple gameplay implications, but in the TTRPG, progressing time will only increase boss health, not increase the cost of items. For now at least. Right now, bosses have 80 or 100 base hit points, depending on how big and bulky they are mainly. And get additional Vitality D6 times 10 hit points. So, the Cleric Beast, for example, has 100 base hit points and plus 2 Vitality. The average result of a D6 die roll is 3.5. So, the Cleric Beast's average hit points are 100 plus 2 times 3.5 times 10, which equals 170. From now on, with the implementation of time progression, the base health of bosses will increase to 100 or 120, and the D6 multiplier will increase from 10 to 12 upon reaching the full moon or night stage of the game, and to 120 or 150 base health and a multiplier of 15 upon reaching the blood moon stage. So, the Cleric Beast would end up with 204 hit points during the night and 255 hit points once the blood moon rises. But that's not all. All bosses will also receive a bonus die to all their attack rolls, meaning they roll an additional die and get to eliminate the lowest one. So if the Cleric Beast's Claw Swipe deals 1d6 plus 3 slashing damage, it will now roll 2d6 and use the highest result for damage calculations. That way, the damage range doesn't increase, but the odds of rolling high within the given range do, and the chance of missing drastically decreases, whereas the chance of getting a critical hit drastically increases. But no, bosses won't get bonus die to the additional damage from critical hits. Those will be almost deadly anyways, I think. And for the final part of today's update, not really a rule change, but a rule clarification. Concerning movement, which wasn't really fleshed out until now. To make things clear, characters may move through an ally space without movement penalty, but they may not pass through an enemy space. And also, there are no attacks of opportunity, although I might implement them as a special feature for some enemies, and maybe a trick weapon. But that will have to wait until the next update. I also noticed that my characters don't really move after like the first round, rather standing still and just hitting opponents until all of them are gone. But I think that's less an issue with the rules of movement and more with me not putting enough ranged enemies on the board. So I will do that more in the future. And that wraps up today's update. Let me know what you think in the comments. In the next playtesting video, our heroes will make their way down Hemwick Charnel Lane in search of the Witches of Hemwick, and I hope to see you again in that video. Until then, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, of course, to the backlogs and press continue. But you probably did already, didn't you? Anyways, see you then. Bye!